we're slowly approaching the end of this series, so in this lesson let's just replace all usages of any type with more specific types because it's recommended to avoid any type as much as possible. So let's start with the functions.ts. In this file, as we can see, we're using an any type for the first parameter of the normalized select value function, as well as for the return value. And in order to replace this any type with more specific type, we have to find where we use this function normalized select value. We're doing it inside base select component. And as we can see in here, we're passing either string or null into this function, so it makes sense to use string or null union type instead of any type right here. So I'm going to use a union of two types, string and null. And now that we have typed the first parameter of this function, now we have an error related to is none function because this function accepts number as the first parameter. So in order to fix this issue, we have to explicitly cast value param into number like so. And the whole point of this function is to actually convert values into numbers. So to properly choose type for the return value of this function, we have to consider this ternary expression. And as we can see, if the first part of this expression executes, we're going to get either string or null value. But if the second part of the expression executes, we're going to get a numeric value because second part of this expression converts values into numbers by using this plus sign right here. So eventually this function can return a value of three different types, whether it will be number, string, or null type. So now that we have properly chosen types for this function, let's get back to base select component and fix the new issue, which we've got after typing normalized select value function. Because earlier we have specified that this function can either return string, number, or null, but payload for this select event that is fired from this component can be either of generic type t or null. So I'm going to explicitly cast this value to one of these types like so by using union type. And now everything is fine in here. Moving on and switch over to a different file, time.ts. As you can see in here, we're converting value stored inside of now reactive variable into any type. Because without doing this, TypeScript is actually going to complain, because here we're trying to apply subtraction operation to different values. Reactive variable now stores an object which represents current date, and computed property in midnight stores amount of milliseconds. So we are operating in here with two different types. And in order to fix this issue, I'm basically going to call getTime method on the date object to get the representation of this date in milliseconds. And now the issue is gone because both operands of this expression are numbers. And exactly the same procedure we're going to follow inside timelineitems.ts module. Right here we're doing subtraction in a couple more places. So in order to avoid using any type right here, I'm going to call getTime method on all these date objects to avoid any kind of errors. And I'm going to do so in both places that are doing subtraction operation, like so. Next one, let's scroll a little bit up and consider syncIdle seconds function. So right here, after we remove this conversion into any type, we're going to get an error because active timeline item property might not have any value, so TypeScript is actually trying to protect us from working with undefined values. So to avoid any kind of errors, I'm going to add a check in here to verify if active timeline item computed property actually contains any value. And if not, we're basically going to finish execution of this function by returning an empty value. And just to verify that we're going to get an error without this check, I'm going to comment it out for now. And right away we can see that TypeScript highlights a couple places. So this check is actually necessary to have in here. Let's move on. The similar fix we're going to do inside timeline item timer module inside this start timeline item timer function. In here we are trying to reference timeline item variable which might not have any value as well. So before referencing this variable, I'm going to add a check, which is going to verify if we're going to proceed further. That means timeline item variable contains value. But additionally in here, we also have to include the same check. Inside this closure, we are passing inside setInterval function. And we're gonna have to apply the same fix in one more place inside stopTimelineItemTimer function. So let's also use if conditional and verify that activeTimelineItemTimer actually contains value before proceeding further. Otherwise, we're going to finish this function execution. And with that, we have finished replacing all usages of any type across our application, which is a good thing because, as was mentioned before, the more we avoid using any type, the better. So at the end, I'm going to switch over to the browser and click around a little bit in our application just to make sure that we haven't caused any errors by doing all those changes. As we can see, so far application works good. Let's continue development in the next lesson.